Hello, I'm sure that you have done the activity for phase 1 and now we move on to phase 2, which is EA framework and tool selection. In this particular phase, generally it's about selecting the documentation framework for your EA. As you know that framework is the scope and also the boundary of your EA. Within the framework, you would have components. And components, there are two types, horizontal and also vertical components. This phase also concerns with the tool that you are going to use in documenting this component. The tool will include the tools that you are going to use to draw models, and also not to forget the tools that you're going to use to store all these documents, generally the EA repository. In this phase, there are 6 steps. The first step is select an EA documentation framework. The chief architect and with input from the EA team and the stakeholders will be involved in this particular step. What we mean by framework is that, uh, as I mentioned earlier, is the scope or the boundary of the work that you should do. Generally, the framework would identify the areas of the enterprise that the EA will cover and how those areas relate. If you look at the EA3 Cube framework, there are 5 levels. These levels consist of components, and when it comes to documentation, these 5 levels are the levels that you should document. Other EA framework would have maybe not 5, maybe 6 or 7 levels, or maybe a different way of documenting components, regardless of what framework that you are going to use or the EA team are going to use. This will define the scope and also the boundary of your EA initiative. The next step is identify the EA line of business and crosscuts and the order of their documentation. So in this second step of phase 2, what you are going to look into is the line of business. Okay, line of business are basically distinct activities of an organization. It consists of the components, right? The vertical components and also the horizontal components. There are also cross-cutting components. These components are components that is being used by multiple line of business. So these cross-cutting initiatives are those that involves more than one LOB. Okay, normally when we talk about LOB is the departments in an enterprise, but there are also initiatives that involves multiple LOB. The next step is identify the EA components to be documented. I think that more or less this has been described when I'm explaining the previous step. And the next step after identifying the component to be documented is selecting documentations methods that is appropriate for the framework. So in this particular step, so you should look at your framework. If, for example, if it is an EA3 Cube framework, so you should be looking into the 5 levels and also the 3 threads. Okay, each of these level have different ways or different methods in documenting. For example, when you talk about mission statement and also goals and objectives, the components at the goals and initiatives level, the documentation method basically in the form of a report, in the form of a report. For example, the strategic plan, if you are using certain management tools such as balanced scorecard. So these are documentation methods. And if you look at the components for um, say data and information, definitely you're going to use diagrams such as the UML diagrams. So the UML diagrams are the uh, so-called documentation method that you should adopt when you are documenting your data and information. Obviously, you can use a report text-based in documenting data and information. So you would use like use cases, your class diagrams, activity diagrams, and other diagrams that is appropriate for that particular level. What about the last level, which is the infrastructure, the technology and infrastructure level? So, what do you think will be the documentation method that is appropriate for that level? So, as you know that in that level, it's about connectivity, right? The networking infrastructure, and so on. So you would have diagrams such as your networking diagrams, your uh, data void data connectivity diagrams, or technical documents, and those kind of things that pertains to that particular level. Okay, the next step is about selecting software applications or tools to support automated EA documentation. Of course, in this particular step, the EA team need to choose the tools, and the choice of tools, it depends on the above steps. There are tools that is specifically for drawing UML diagrams, such as Visio, or even use an free online modeling diagram like Lucid Chart, and other tools that is appropriate for that particular level. And of course, when you have drawn all these models, when you have documented all these levels, you need to store it somewhere so that other team members can access it. Therefore, the last step is about selecting and establishing an online EE repository for documentation. So this online EE repository is important because of you have team members that comprises of people from different departments, from different backgrounds. You have from the stakeholders, you have the consultants, you have the analysts, and so on. So establishing this EA repository is crucial.